Hello, my name's Heidi. And at 3 a.m., my own father threw me out of the house. No shoes, no suitcase, just because I didn't bow to his new wife. They said I was difficult, emotional, that I didn't understand family. But then I found the altered will, the stolen trust fund, and the proof that they'd been planning my erasure for years. What kind of family scripts your disappearance and then begs when the money stops? Would you have walked away? Or walked into court like I did? I woke up to the sound of pounding on my bedroom door. At first, I thought it was a bad dream, until the second knock rattled the hinges. My heart jumped. I reached for my phone, 3:07 a.m. Heidi! My father's voice came through the wood, hard and sharp. Get up, now. I blinked at the ceiling, confused. Rain tapped against the window panes like 1,000 tiny fingers. I wrapped my robe tighter and opened the door. He was standing there in a wrinkled dress shirt, barefoot, hair out of place, so unlike the man who usually never let a button go unfastened. But his eyes weren't tired. They were angry. Wild. Behind him stood Vera. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Her arms were folded, and that look on her face, like she was watching something finally go her way. She didn't even try to look shocked. "What is going on?" I whispered. "You disrespected Vera," my father snapped, "in my house. That's not going to fly, not anymore." What? My voice cracked. "I haven't said 2 words to her tonight. I've been upstairs all evening." He shoved a coat into my hands. "Then maybe it's your silence that's the problem. Pack your things, or don't. Just get out." At first I didn't move, not out of defiance, just disbelief. I stared at him, hoping to see something shift in his eyes. But there was nothing, not even a flicker of doubt. "Are you serious right now?" "You should have listened," he said. That's what he kept repeating as he dragged me to the front door. I didn't even have my shoes. The marble floor felt cold and unforgiving under my feet as we reached the entryway. He opened the door. A gust of damp wind slapped my face. I looked back at Vera. Still no words. She leaned on the staircase railing like she was enjoying a private show. I turned to him one last time. "Dad, this is your daughter." "No," he said. "You were my daughter, before you chose to be a problem." Then the door slammed behind me. The rain was coming down harder now. It plastered my robe to my skin and soaked through my socks before I even reached the bottom step. I walked to the sidewalk, numb. The street was dark. The nearest streetlight flickered like it couldn't make up its mind whether to shine or die out. I sat at the bus stop down the street, legs shaking, the coat he'd shoved into my hands the only thing between me and the chill. I reached into the pocket. No phone. I must have left it on the nightstand. I leaned forward, clutching the coat around me like armor. My head spun, not from the cold, but from the memory of that look in his eyes. It wasn't the first time Vera had tried to edge me out, but it was the first time he'd let her. Just the morning before, I was dusting the old family altar, something my mom insisted we keep tidy, even after she passed. That little table in the sunroom, filled with framed memories. There used to be a photo of her and Dad from their 25th anniversary, her smile soft, his proud. I'd seen that photo every week for years, but yesterday it was gone, replaced by a glossy shot of Dad and Vera at a gala last fall, framed in gold, like it had always belonged there. I'd stared at it for a full minute, dust rag limp in my hand. I didn't say anything. I swallowed the lump in my throat, chalked it up to bad taste, and moved on. I should have known that wasn't the beginning. It was a message. The signs had been there. Vera moving heirlooms around the house, shifting the dinner seating arrangement so I was no longer at the end of the table, but off to the side. Subtle changes, too polite to argue with, but just sharp enough to sting. And Dad, he'd been pulling away too. Quieter, less involved, brushing off my questions with, "Not now, Heidi," or "Let Vera handle that." So I stayed quiet. I told myself not to stir the pot. I played the peacekeeper. But peacekeeping is for people who are allowed to stay at the table. I hadn't realized I was already standing outside the door. I wasn't kicked out because I shouted. I was kicked out because I was still there. And now I was here. On a wet bench in the middle of the night, in my robe, in the rain, no wallet, no shoes. and not a single soul who knew where I was. Then I remembered. My phone had been in the coat pocket after all, hidden under the lining. I pulled it out, hands trembling, and powered it on. No missed calls. One new text. From Dad. "You should have listened." A sob started to rise in my chest, but I bit it down. They wanted me gone, erased, like I'd never been part of that house, that family, that name. But they forgot something. I still held the trust. The library had just opened its doors when I walked in, soaked from the night before. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, and a warm blast from the heating vents made me blink hard. I hadn't slept. The bench at the bus stop offered no comfort, and neither did the idea of calling someone to pick me up. I made my way to the far corner, near a dusty window with a view of the back lot. No one else was there yet, just me, a stranger with matted hair and a coat that wasn't mine. I plugged my phone into the nearest outlet, pulled my knees up, and wrapped the coat tighter around my legs. The screen flickered to life, and with it, the ping of missed messages and app notifications, texts from friends, unread calls from numbers I didn't recognize, and then I saw it. A Facebook post. From Vera. The Vaughn Women, Legacy, Grace, and Leadership. The photo was polished, clearly a professional shoot. Vera stood in the center, flanked by two of her cousins and Bryn, her daughter, all in coordinated cream outfits. Underneath, she'd tagged dozens of family members. All except one. I scrolled through the comments. "Beautiful family," one read. Another said, "Where's Heidi?" followed by a string of silence. Someone replied, "She's not around anymore, is she?" Someone else said, "Let's not stir things up." My jaw clenched. I wasn't just left out of the picture. I was erased, like I'd never existed in the first place. It didn't take long before my name was trending, in the wrong circles. The family chat was buzzing, not with concern, but with speculation. Vera was already responding to some of the private messages, spinning the story carefully. "Heidi's going through something. It's best we respect her space." Space? They'd pushed me out the door barefoot and in a robe, but now I was taking space? I closed the app and stared at my reflection in the window. Puffy eyes, dry lips, tangled hair. None of that scared me. What did, though, was how calculated it had all become, how perfectly Vera executed each move. One photo at a time. One story at a time. I stayed in that library until noon. I used the restroom to clean up the best I could, paper towels for my face, a borrowed comb from the lost and found box, and coffee from the vending machine that tasted like burnt cardboard. Around 1 o'clock, I got a message from my cousin Emily. She was always the quiet one at family gatherings, more comfortable texting than talking. Her message was simple. "Aunt Vera asked if you're coming to brunch. She said you should." I stared at the screen. Brunch? After last night? But something about the invitation felt too neat, too orchestrated. Still, I said yes. By 2, I stood outside the Belmont Club, wiping the bottom of my borrowed flats on the doormat. The hostess barely looked at me as she led me to the Vaughn table, where the extended family had gathered in full Sunday best. I walked in wearing yesterday's jeans and a sweater that had seen better days. Vera looked up. Her smile was all teeth. "There she is," she said, like I was a long-lost relative and not the woman she helped throw onto the sidewalk hours earlier. I took my seat quietly, sandwiched between 2 second cousins who didn't make eye contact. Garrett sat at the head of the table, chewing methodically, like nothing had happened. As soon as the waitress left, Vera cleared her throat. "Before we eat," she said, "I just want to address something delicate." The table stilled. Knives paused mid-spread. Conversations died like a snuffed candle. Vera leaned forward, her voice dropping slightly. "I know things have been tense, and I didn't want to bring this up, but I think we should all be honest with each other." She turned toward me, faux concern dripping from her tone. "Heidi, we noticed one of the family heirlooms is missing from my jewelry box." I stared at her. "I'm sure it was just a mistake," she added quickly, palms raised as if to signal peace. But the pearl necklace? The one Celia left behind? It's not where it used to be. Gasps and whispers bounced across the table. A few eyes flicked toward me. Garrett kept chewing. I didn't speak, not at first. My brain told me to respond, to deny, defend, fight. But my heart knew exactly what was happening. It was a setup. Carefully planted, meticulously timed, I pushed my chair back and stood. The scraping sound echoed across the marble floor. No one stopped me, not even my father. I walked out without touching the water glass in front of me. Outside, the sunlight was too bright. It stung. But the air was fresh, and I could breathe again. I walked, not to anywhere in particular, just far enough until my legs started to burn. Eventually, I found myself at White Point Garden, a quiet park at the tip of the city. I sat on a bench beneath a massive oak, one my mother used to love. I remembered how she used to bring me here, when I had a bad day, when Dad was away on business and she needed a break from pretending everything was fine. "You don't fight mud with mud, baby," she told me once as we watched squirrels chase each other through the grass. "You clean your name by walking above it." That was her style. Elegant, quiet, dignified. And I knew what she'd do now. She wouldn't scream. She wouldn't curse. She'd document everything. She'd let people say what they wanted. Then she'd hand over the truth with a smile. I sat there for what felt like an hour. Then my phone buzzed again. It was a message from another cousin. This one, just a photo. A scan of the printed family tree they'd handed out at the reunion 2 weeks ago. My name wasn't on it. She'd scribbled a question underneath. "Did you drop out?" I stared at it, my eyes blurry. I didn't drop out. I was deleted. 2 days had passed since brunch at the Belmont Club, and I still hadn't unpacked the borrowed overnight bag Ruth had quietly dropped off at my Airbnb. It sat by the door like a silent witness to everything unraveling. The room was quiet except for the distant hum of traffic and the occasional creak of old wood beneath the floorboards. There were no photos here, no heirlooms, just me, a bed, and a kitchen that smelled faintly of burnt coffee. That morning, a soft rustling under the door startled me. I'd barely touched my second cup of coffee when I noticed a cream-colored envelope on the floor. No postage, no name on the front. Just the kind of deliberate plainness that made your skin tighten a little. I hesitated, then picked it up and slid my finger under the seal. Inside was a short note, handwritten in tidy block letters. "I worked with your mother. There's something you need to see. I'm in town for 3 days. If you're ready, meet me at 11 a.m. The Red Porch Cafe." No signature. Just as I finished reading it, my phone buzzed with a calendar reminder, except I hadn't set one. 11 a.m. blinked back at me, synced from a calendar I hadn't touched in years. I didn't question it. By 10:40, I was already seated at a back table of the Red Porch Cafe, a small spot near the waterfront with faded red chairs and coffee that was always a little too strong. I sipped from a chipped mug and kept my eyes on the door. At 11:02, a man in his 70s entered. Thin frame, salt and pepper beard, worn loafers. He looked around until his eyes landed on me. He nodded once and walked over. "You look like her," he said, sitting before I could speak. "Same jaw, same stare when something doesn't add up. I assume you're the one who slipped the letter under my door?" He nodded again. "Name's Henry Lawson. I handled Celia's estate, or at least I was supposed to." I raised my eyebrows. "What do you mean, supposed to?" He pulled out a leather folder from his worn briefcase, opened it carefully, and slid a few papers across the table. My name stared back at me, typed neatly in bold. Heidi Quinn. Beneficiary. Primary trustee. Executor of the Vaughn Family Trust. Signed by Celia. Stamped. Notarized. 2 months before she passed. I blinked. "I don't understand. I never saw this version." "You weren't supposed to," he said softly. This was the original final version, but after Celia died, Garrett informed me that a newer version had been drafted, one that transferred oversight to him and Vera. "And you believed him?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. Henry looked down at his coffee. He showed me a document. It looked real, but I always had my doubts. Then you disappeared from the family record, and I couldn't shake the feeling something was wrong. I flipped through the pages again. This version of the will didn't just name me, it protected the trust from being amended in case of Garrett's remarriage. That clause alone changed everything. Why now? I asked. He shrugged. I'm old and tired, and I liked your mother. She trusted me. I can't undo what I didn't stop, but maybe this helps you do something about it. He stood, placed a small USB drive on the table, and nodded again. That's everything I have. Originals are with my attorney. You'll need a real fight to challenge it. But this puts the law back on your side. Then he walked out. No fanfare, just gone. I sat there for a long time after he left. I reread every page, my hands trembling a little. Not from shock, more like clarity. Focus. Realization sinking in. They hadn't just thrown me out of the house. They'd tried to legally erase me. It wasn't just about power anymore. This was an attack on my mother's legacy, on the promises she made when she wrote my name on those lines. And they thought I'd never see it. I paid for my coffee, gathered the papers, and stepped back into the wind. Instead of going straight home, I stopped by the small legal resource center a few blocks down. I didn't need them to explain the documents. I just needed a scanner and a place quiet enough to think. I uploaded every page, labeled them carefully, and saved a copy to 3 different places: a secure drive, my email, and 1 physical printout. Then I sent a text to Leora. Me. Do you still handle estate law? Her reply came almost instantly. Leora. For you, always. What's going on? Me. Meet soon? Leora. My office. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. I didn't write anything else. Not yet. But the words formed in my head as I walked back to the Airbnb. They tried to burn the paper trail, but I still held the match. That evening, I pulled out the old laptop I'd kept after my mother died. It still had her initials carved into the bottom with a small heart next to them. Garrett had refused to even open it after the funeral, said it was too sentimental. Truth was, he probably didn't want anyone finding what was inside. It took me a few minutes to remember the password. I tried birthdays, anniversary dates. Nothing worked until I typed in the name of the song she used to hum while making tea. Moon River. The screen lit up. Old photos, recipes, spreadsheets. Nothing unusual at first glance. Then, a folder titled In Case. Inside were scanned documents, conversations, notes, letters, and 1 handwritten note with a date written just 2 weeks before she passed. If you're reading this, it means they tried. The ink bled slightly near the edges, like it had been touched by tears or coffee. I stared at it for a long time. Then I whispered to the screen, as if she could hear me through the glass. And now, so will I. The air outside was cooler than it had been in days, a slight break from Charleston's usual late summer thickness. I'd just come back from Leora's office the evening before, my bag heavy with scanned copies, hard drives, and notes that made my entire shoulder ache. I didn't even unpack. I left everything on the couch and fell asleep on top of the covers, still in jeans, with 1 shoe half off. So when my phone rang the next morning and I saw Garrett's name on the screen, I didn't answer it right away. I stared at it until it stopped ringing. He called again a minute later. On the 3rd call, I picked up. Hey, sweetheart, he said, too soft, too easy. Dad, I said, not giving him anything else. I was thinking, he started, maybe we could sit down and talk, just us, nothing formal. That's unexpected, I said flatly. There was a pause, like he'd hoped I'd fill the silence with something warmer. Look, I know there's been tension, he said, but I really think if we just meet and clear the air, it might help everyone. You know how things get misunderstood. I haven't misunderstood anything, I said. But fine, when? He told me he was at the family office that morning, said he had some documents to review, and thought it might be good for me to stop by. No pressure, he added, which, coming from him, only meant pressure in disguise. By the time I pulled into the gravel lot of the family office, the sun was already high, casting sharp shadows against the white columns. It used to be my mother's consulting office. Now it was painted a different color and had Vera's name listed as Strategic Director on the front door. Garrett greeted me at the door with that same half-hug he gave to investors. "Thanks for coming, Heidi. I appreciate you being open." I didn't respond. I walked past him, straight into the conference room where I'd sat dozens of times growing up, coloring while my mother worked. The table was the same. The pictures were not. Every photo of Celia had been replaced with awards bearing Vera's name or framed newspaper clippings from local charity events. Garrett followed me in and handed me a single sheet of paper from a file folder. "I know things have been complicated," he said, "and you've had questions. This document is just a clarification, a cleanup. Nothing changes your role. Just streamlines things for the trust moving forward." I looked down. It was titled Family Trust, Role Adjustment Addendum. My name was on it. He stood across from me, hands folded like he was leading a prayer. I read quickly. 3 paragraphs in, a phrase jumped out. "In the event of family restructuring or realignment, administrative rights may be reassigned to the acting spouse of the primary trust holder." I looked up slowly. "To Vera?" I asked. Garrett blinked, then tried to smile like I'd misunderstood. "It's just a formality. Legalese. It won't affect anything." "You're trying to hand the trust to her?" "No," he said, and then quickly added, "It's more of a safeguard, for continuity." "Continuity?" I repeated. I didn't sit. I held the paper in my hands and let the silence stretch. "Do you want me to sign this now?" I asked. He shifted. "I mean, it would save time, but if you need to review it—" "I already did," I said, cutting him off. "Last night." His eyebrows rose. "I scanned it from your office server yesterday afternoon. You forgot to change the access passwords." He looked stunned for a beat, then cleared his throat. "I didn't realize you never do," I said quietly, placing the paper on the table without signing. "You had one chance to choose your daughter. You picked silence, and that silence is written all over this page." I walked out without another word. He followed me to the parking lot, but only halfway. By the time I got to my car, he was already turning back toward the building. In the window above, Vera watched it all unfold. Her mouth was a hard line, her eyes unreadable. That evening, I returned to the Airbnb and opened my laptop. I pulled up the scanned copy of Celia's final handwritten addendum and attached it to an email addressed to Leora. Subject: Next step. Message: Attachments ready. Filing formal notice tonight. Thanks. Then I logged into the estate portal and uploaded every piece: Celia's will, Henry's notarized records, and the protective clause that locked out posthumous changes from any spouse not named in the original. As the confirmation message loaded, my phone lit up with a delivery notice: Certified mail delivered. V. Dorian. Signed by recipient. I imagined the look on her face as she opened the envelope. I imagined her hand shaking just slightly as she unfolded the document, reading the ink that still bore my mother's name. "You wanted to own the name, Vera. Now I own the legacy." After I clicked submit on the official estate court notification, a strange kind of quiet settled over me. Not peace, nothing as comforting as that, but a calm that felt earned, like finally exhaling after holding your breath too long. 2 mornings later, I was back in Leora's office. Her assistant brought us coffee in paper cups, and I stared out the window while Leora printed the final revocation forms. Charleston's sky looked bruised with clouds, the kind that warned of a storm even if the forecast swore otherwise. Leora slid the last sheet across the table. "This will pause all disbursements until the court rules on full control," she said. "But you're going to shake a few trees today." "That's the plan," I said, signing my name with steady pressure. "They've built their world on those branches." She didn't smile. Not like she used to when we were 20-something interns learning case law and daydreaming about changing the world. Today, her face was as serious as mine. By lunchtime, the trust fund's auto payments were frozen. No more monthly transfers to Garrett and Vera, no more foundation payouts, no more prepaid anything. I didn't need a press release. I just needed numbers to stop moving, and move they did, in reverse. By late afternoon, Garrett was in a meeting with local sponsors when his card declined, twice, while covering lunch. He made a call from the parking lot, pacing. The foundation accountant called Vera. 10 minutes later, Bryn's tuition payment for her semester in Florence bounced, and I didn't pick up my phone once. The calls came in like clockwork. Garrett first, then Vera, then an unknown number, which I assumed was some third-tier lawyer they dragged into it. I silenced them all and went to the park instead. The one where Mom used to take me on days like this, when she needed to remember that life had more color than whatever meeting room tried to flatten her. I sat on a bench beneath a canopy of oaks and watched an elderly couple feed birds. The wind rustled through the leaves with a rhythm I hadn't heard in months. My phone buzzed again. I glanced down. Voicemail from Garrett. I let it sit. Another buzz. This time, a text. Garrett, you cut the fund? You can't do that. This affects your whole family. I read it twice, then typed my reply without flinching. Me. I know. I read the documents you tried to trick me into signing. I trust you taught Vera to read hers, too. He didn't reply. That night, the phones kept ringing. I kept writing, emails, scans, everything filed and backed up in triplicate. Not just for court, but for me, for my sanity. I wasn't trying to destroy them. I was stopping the bleeding. The kind they'd caused when they took what wasn't theirs and called it inheritance. By the end of the week, the rumors began. The Charleston Register ran a quiet headline buried on page 4. Questions raised about Vaughn Family Foundation accounting. The whispers in town were louder than the article. Did Vera mismanage the money? Why hasn't Garrett made a statement? Wasn't that trust supposed to be for the kids? I hadn't spoken publicly, I hadn't posted a word. But silence, used right, makes noise on its own. Ruth called that Friday evening. Her voice was soft but clear. I know you're being painted dramatic, she said, but I see through it, and I want you to know you're not wrong. I swallowed hard. Thanks. I sat through a dozen dinners listening to Vera pretend she built that legacy. But I was there when your mom wrote the first draft. She built it for you. You were supposed to carry it, not them. I let that sit in my chest for a moment. Something warm bloomed through the ache. I'm not giving it away again, I said. I know, Ruth replied. And they're scared. That's why they're scrambling. She wasn't wrong. 2 nights later, I came home to a package sitting upright against my door. No return label, no note. Just a small white envelope with my name printed on it. Inside, a USB stick, a label taped to it in blocky handwriting. Play this before you go any further. I stared at it for a minute, thumb pressing into the corner like it might reveal something. If they were already this scared, what's on here must be worse than I imagined. The USB stick sat untouched on the table for almost an hour. I'd made myself a cup of tea, then let it go cold, poured another. Walked around the living room twice, staring at the shadows moving across the hardwood floor as the sun slipped behind the oaks. The stillness in my Airbnb felt too intentional, too quiet for what I was about to hear. Eventually, I sat down, slipped the drive into my laptop, and clicked open the only file it contained, an unmarked video labeled with nothing but the date. I don't know what I expected. Maybe a scanned document, a recording of a family brunch, some benign piece of evidence meant to nudge an already open wound. But what played on the screen felt like betrayal in HD. The camera was hidden, positioned at an angle from behind a framed painting on a wall I recognized instantly. The study at the foundation office. Garrett's voice came first, low but clear. She's becoming a liability, he said. Emotionally unstable. Always has been. Vera's reply was crisp, measured. Then we lean into that. We play the long game, use her reaction against her, let her dig her own hole. My stomach clenched. I leaned in closer, fingers tightening around the ceramic mug. Garrett laughed, an ugly, hollow sound I'd never heard from him before. If she gets emotional, we'll say she's irrational. If she fights back, we'll call it harassment. It's worked before, Vera added. They knew. They had planned every moment of my erasure, every sideways look, every omission, every cold glance from relatives who once kissed my forehead and said I was my mother's twin. I paused the video halfway through, not because I couldn't stomach the rest, because I needed to absorb what I'd already seen. This wasn't just neglect, it wasn't misunderstanding, it was strategy. I hit play again. At one point, Garrett said, "Once the revised version goes through, she'll have no standing. She won't even know until it's too late." "She's not stupid," Vera muttered. "She's tired," he corrected her. "There's a difference, and tired people make mistakes." I closed the laptop without finishing the last minute. I didn't need more. They'd buried me on purpose. Later that evening, just past 9, a notification popped up on my phone. A video message from Garrett. His face filled the screen, sleeves rolled up, tie askew. His eyes were red, but I wasn't sure if it was from crying or whatever performance he was about to deliver. "Heidi," he began. I'm sorry." He paused, inhaling deeply. "This isn't what I wanted. Things got complicated. Vera, she thought she was doing what was best for the family, and Another pause, a shake of the head. "I should have spoken up sooner." I waited. I waited for the words that mattered, the kind that took ownership, that said, "I chose wrong. I abandoned you." Instead, he said, "But you know, you've always been difficult, hard to reach. You have this way of twisting things. It made it tough to trust you sometimes." I pressed delete without watching the rest. There it was, the real Garrett, the one who cried only when it cost him something, the one who apologized just enough to feel noble but blamed enough to stay innocent. The next morning, a knock came at the door. I opened it to find a young man in a blazer holding a thick white envelope. "Heidi Quinn?" he asked. "Yes." "You've been served." He handed me the envelope and turned without waiting for acknowledgement. Inside, a cease and desist letter from Vera's legal team. They accused me of defamation, breach of fiduciary duty, cyber harassment, and weaponizing family assets for personal vendettas. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I walked to the kitchen, opened my laptop, and sent an email to Leora with one subject line. "Now?" She called within 5 minutes. "We've got more than enough," she said before I could speak. "I've already prepped the response, a 52-page breakdown of every violation we've tracked, including the Foundation's misuse of charitable funds. I've flagged 4 transfers for federal review." "Good," I said, sitting back in my chair. "Send it." "Already done." By late afternoon, Vera's legal team received a formal reply. No settlement, full countersuit, documents en route to the IRS and State Attorney General. They sued because I had power. We responded because I had proof. That evening, Ruth called me again. "They're unraveling," she said. "I bumped into Garrett at the market today. Couldn't look me in the eye." "Let them," I replied. "They've been hiding behind politeness for long enough." "You just keep walking forward," she said. "You're almost there." After the call, I turned off the lights and sat in the dark for a while. Thinking. Feeling. When you grow up believing your family is sacred, betrayal doesn't come in just one color. It comes in quiet tones, in polite shrugs, in tears that pretend to be regret. But it doesn't change what was done. I checked my email once more before heading to bed. Leora had just sent one line. "I just got subpoena notice. They're trying to preempt you in court." I didn't panic. I smiled. Let them. I've already started writing the last chapter. By the time I pulled into the parking lot across from the Foundation Gala, dusk had turned the Charleston sky a deep lavender. I stayed in the car for a few minutes, watching through the windshield as well-dressed couples stepped onto the red carpet, smiled for photos, and disappeared inside. No one knew I was there. No one had invited me. That was the point. I adjusted my black blazer in the rearview mirror. Not for vanity, there was no camera waiting to catch me, but for armor. I opened my phone and checked the clock. 6:57 p.m. My fingers hovered over the screen where the post sat in draft mode, already loaded onto my social media accounts and queued across 3 advocacy groups I'd worked with in the past. 3 minutes. The posts weren't dramatic. They didn't name-call. There was no colorful language or emotional appeals, just numbers, dates, screenshots, bank transactions, a copy of the original will, and excerpts from the version they'd buried. I didn't need a sob story. I had receipts. At exactly 7:00 p.m., I tapped Publish. Then I stepped out of the car, crossed the street, and leaned against the wrought iron fence that bordered the venue. Through the windows, I saw Vera speaking to a group of donors near the fireplace. She wore navy blue, the color Mom always said projected control. Garrett stood a few feet away, smiling politely at someone holding a wine glass. Inside, no one knew their phones were already lighting up. It started as a ripple. A waiter paused mid-step. A woman in a sequined gown lowered her flute of champagne to check her screen. Then another, and another. I watched Vera's face change. First confusion, then stillness, then something far colder. She reached for Garrett's arm, whispered something in his ear. He froze. I turned and walked away before the first news site even picked it up. By midnight, it was everywhere. Charleston charity faces scrutiny over financial mismanagement. Exclusive, documents suggest misuse of Vaughn family trust. Original will reveals conflict at heart of estate dispute. And underneath it all, comment after comment. This explains a lot. Wait, they erased her from the family tree? Why hasn't Vera responded? They didn't need to. The silence was the response. Of course, the counterattack came quickly. By morning, a blog surfaced under a pseudonym. Long, winding, poorly edited, but accusing me of everything from narcissism to borderline delusions. There was even an audio clip, heavily edited, where I supposedly said, "I'll destroy him if I have to." It was my voice, but cut and stitched so clumsily that even someone half awake could spot the manipulation. I didn't flinch. I called Leora. "We'll let them post," I said. "Then we'll subpoena every server they touched." That afternoon, Ruth called. Her voice carried a mix of pride and exhaustion. "They're desperate," she said. "You rattled them." "I didn't think it would hit this fast," I admitted. "They built their reputation like a house of cards," she said. "It was always going to fall fast. It just needed the right gust of wind." Still, there was a weight to it. The names they were calling me, the whispers about my mental health, the subtle jabs about me being unstable, jealous, too damaged to inherit that kind of responsibility. It was exactly the same script they'd used on my mother. Toward the end, when she started questioning the way Garrett handled the money, later that night, 2 messages came in from people I hadn't heard from in years. The first was from an old high school friend who now worked for a local nonprofit. "We saw what they're doing to you," she wrote. "If you need a statement, I remember how Vera talked about you even before your mom passed. She always made it sound like you were fragile, like you couldn't handle real life. It never sat right." The second was from a former coworker of my mom's, one I only vaguely remembered. She once told me, "If they ever try to take this away from Heidi, it'll be because they can't control her. I think that day has come." I sat with those words for a long time, because for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was standing alone. At noon the next day, I checked my email for the 100th time. There it was. A court confirmation that my petition to re-establish the original structure of Celia's trust and remove Garrett and Vera as trustees had been accepted. The hearing was set, all documents validated, all signatures in place. It was happening. No more side skirmishes. No more games of reputation management or who could out-host the other at brunch. Next week, we stopped pretending blood means loyalty. I didn't sleep the night before the hearing, not from nerves, at least not the kind that made my hands shake or my thoughts run in circles. It was a deeper unease, the kind you feel when something that once defined your life is about to be laid bare in front of strangers in suits and wooden benches. By 8:30 a.m., I was standing in front of the Charleston courthouse, dressed in navy blue, hair pinned tight, every detail chosen to project one thing: control, not grief, not anger, not pity. Garrett, Vera, and Bryn arrived together, like they were walking into church, all crisp lines and polished shoes. Garrett's jaw was set so tightly it looked like it hurt to breathe. Vera, as always, was poised, but the lines around her eyes betrayed a different kind of tension. Bryn seemed unsure if she should follow their lead or disappear into the floor. I didn't speak to any of them. Inside the courtroom, reporters filled the back rows, some familiar from charity events, others, newer, chasing the scent of public disgrace. I sat on the left side with Leora beside me. She kept her files stacked neatly, her demeanor cool and unreadable. As always, she let the facts speak before she did. The judge, a gray-haired woman with a tone that brooked no nonsense, opened the session without preamble. "Let's proceed." Leora stood. "Your Honor, we'll begin with documentation regarding unauthorized withdrawals from the Vaughn Family Trust. These funds were allocated for educational and charitable disbursements per the original trust established by Celia Quinn." She walked to the center, handed over a folder. "Within this, you'll find a breakdown of financial transactions initiated by Vera Dorian, who was not legally appointed as trustee, as well as evidence that Garrett Vaughn signed off on these without proper consent." The judge skimmed, her brow furrowed. "And the total amount misallocated?" Leora didn't blink. "Just under $274,000. One major payment went directly to cover tuition for Bryn Dorian's university semester abroad." A hush fell over the room. I watched Vera's spine stiffen. Leora turned to the bench. "Miss Quinn will now speak." I stood, walked slowly to the podium, met the judge's gaze. "The trust my mother created wasn't built for people who saw her as a stepping stone," I said clearly. "It wasn't a prize, it was a promise, and it certainly wasn't meant to fund a lifestyle that excluded her own daughter." Vera shifted in her seat. Garrett looked straight ahead. "My mother's final addendum," I continued, "stated explicitly that in the event of remarriage, her wishes were not to be altered. That clause was ignored. Her name was buried along with her will, and mine was nearly erased in the process." Vera tried to speak, but the judge raised a hand. "You'll wait your turn." I returned to my seat. Garrett's attorney began to murmur something, but Garrett stood on his own. "If I may," he said quietly. His voice wavered. The judge nodded once. Briefly. He looked at me. Not past me, not through me. For once, he looked at me. "I thought I was doing what was best for the family," he said. "I didn't realize how far things had gone." My fingers curled against my leg, nails biting skin. "Mr. Vaughn," the judge said, "intentions do not absolve violations." She turned to her clerk. "Enter Exhibit 17. Proceed with ruling." The clerk handed her a single page, my mother's handwritten clause, validated and notarized. "I find the actions of Garrett Vaughn and Vera Dorian in breach of the original trust stipulations," the judge said. "Trustee rights are hereby revoked. Administrative control is reinstated to Heidi Quinn. Furthermore, restitution must be made for misappropriated funds within 90 days." Vera rose from her chair. "This is a smear campaign." "Sit down," the judge said flatly. Garrett tried to interject. "Your Honor, I never—" The officer standing at the door moved slightly forward. I leaned in and whispered to him as he sat, "You chose silence. This is the cost." He didn't reply. When the gavel struck, it didn't feel triumphant. It felt final. Outside the courtroom, the media swarm was immediate. I moved quickly through them. One reporter, a younger woman with wide eyes, mouthed, "You did it!" I didn't stop walking. In the hallway, Ruth was waiting. She opened her arms, and I stepped into them without hesitation. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. Across the lobby, Vera stormed through the double doors, heels clacking like bullets on tile. Bryn stood still, shoulders tight, eyes darting around like she'd just realized the roof was gone. Garrett remained seated inside, staring at the bench where I'd stood. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with the lights off. My computer glowed against the dark, and I opened the application I'd drafted a month ago, an educational fund submission under a foundation name no one in my family knew. Recipient: Bryn Dorian. Full tuition. 1 year, no credit required. I hovered over the button, then clicked send. She never needed to know it came from the woman they tried to erase. The letter arrived the same week the ruling became final. Not an email, not a voicemail. Handwritten, folded carefully in a soft blue envelope with no return address, just my name on the front, in ink I immediately recognized. Vera's handwriting. I turned the envelope over twice before opening it. My instincts were still sharp, my caution intact. But curiosity, and something that felt vaguely like obligation, pushed me to read. Heidi, I'd like to talk. Not argue, not litigate, just talk. I'll be at the church garden Friday at noon. If you choose not to come, I'll understand. V. I sat with the letter for hours. Part of me expected it to self-destruct, like in a spy movie. Another part wondered if I should bring someone, Ruth, Leora, anyone, to sit nearby in case it was some elaborate attempt to twist the knife one last time. But Friday came, and I walked to the church garden alone. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that wraps around your shoulders like a blanket and reminds you that grief and grace often share the same silence. Vera was already seated on one of the stone benches under the dogwood tree, wearing black slacks and a pale blouse, hair pulled back too tight, like she was trying to hold herself together by her roots. She didn't stand. She just looked at me and nodded once. I didn't sit right away. I stood in front of her, arms crossed, letting the moment stretch longer than it needed to. I never hated you, she said finally. I blinked. That's a strange opening. She clasped her hands together in her lap. I couldn't let Bryn live in your shadow. I tilted my head. So you erased me, lied about me, drugged me with your words in every room I walked into? She sighed. You were always so sure of yourself, so much like your mother. That wasn't a compliment. No, she admitted. It wasn't meant to be. We sat in silence for a while. Leaves fluttered above us. A couple passed through the garden, speaking softly, not noticing us. I thought if I could protect what Bryn had, she said, then maybe she'd have a shot. Maybe people wouldn't compare her to you every time she entered a room. I didn't soften. I didn't lean forward or touch her hand. I wasn't there to reconcile. I was there to understand the shape of the damage. You didn't need to erase me, I said. You just needed to raise her. She nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the ground. I suppose you're right. There was nothing else to say. I stood and walked away. She didn't follow. Later that afternoon, I went to the bank. It was quiet there, too. Most people didn't fund scholarships anonymously, but I wasn't most people. And Bryn, despite her silence, deserved a life untethered to the poison that had spilled between her mother and me. I finalized the transfer, double-checked the name, and handed the paperwork to the manager. She'll never know it came from me, I told Leora that evening over the phone. She doesn't need to, Leora said. Some things aren't about thanks. I smiled into the receiver. No, they're about ending things the right way. 1 week later, I stood beneath the magnolia tree where my mother's memorial had once been planned before Vera canceled it in favor of a cocktail fundraiser for the foundation. This time, there were no photographers, no catered food, just a folding table with a linen cloth, a bouquet of fresh lilies, and people who had known Celia Quinn for who she truly was. Ruth read a poem. One of Mom's friends from her advocacy group told a story about how Celia once spent her weekend helping a woman she barely knew avoid foreclosure. Someone else played an old voicemail where Mom laughed mid-sentence. We all laughed with her. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was clinging to her memory. I felt like I was living it. That night, I returned to my apartment, a small sunlit place with creaky floorboards and a bookshelf I built myself. On the shelf sat 3 framed photos, one of Mom, one of me and Ruth at the courthouse, and a third frame still empty. I don't know why I hadn't filled it. Maybe I was waiting for something that didn't exist anymore, or maybe I'd left it open for the future, to remind myself that there are parts of life still unwritten. I leaned back into the sofa and stared at the wall across from me, feeling the stillness not as absence, but as peace. I wasn't trying to rebuild the family, I was trying to rebuild what family meant to me. The next morning, I visited the cemetery. The groundskeeper nodded as I passed. He remembered me from when I'd fought to have Mom's grave moved back to the original plot she chose, before Vera changed the order without telling anyone. I knelt by her headstone, brushed a leaf from her name, and placed a single lily at its base. "They tried to write me out," I whispered, "but I wrote you back in. And that will always be enough. Sometimes, family isn't defined by blood, but by the courage to stand alone when everyone else turns their back." Heidi's story reminds us that silence in the face of betrayal is not strength, but reclaiming your voice is. Have you ever had to fight to be seen in your own family? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful true-life revenge stories and emotional journeys like this one. Hi, I'm Melanie. My father called me retarded in front of the entire board, and then threw me out of the only life I'd ever known, over one mistake. But what if it wasn't a mistake? What if the people I loved most planned every piece of my downfall, slowly, quietly, for years? They rewrote my contract, forged my resignation, locked me out of my own home. I found out about the meeting from a calendar update I wasn't supposed to see. It was buried under another invite. Strategy sync, 9 a.m. I blinked. That was my project. I clicked it open. Ronan had scheduled it with legal, ops, and the executive team. My name was missing. I marched down the hall to ask Dana, my assistant. She avoided my eyes, pretending to type. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. "The meeting this morning, why wasn't I looped in?" Dana hesitated. "I thought you knew." "Knew what?" She looked down. Ronan said, "He told me you wouldn't be needed." My stomach dropped. "It's my project." "I know. I didn't think it was my place to question him." She wasn't lying. Not entirely. But she wasn't telling the truth either. The first cut didn't bleed. It just left this strange hollow behind my ribs. That night, I barely slept. I rehearsed what I'd say, how I'd ask my dad what the hell was going on. I told myself there had to be some misunderstanding, some calendar glitch maybe. I even thought about calling Ronan, but I couldn't stomach hearing that smug, syrupy voice say something like, "Let's not get emotional here, sis." I walked into the boardroom at 8:55 the next morning. The usual suspects were already there. Legal, ops, my dad, at the head of the table in his custom navy suit. Ronan sat near him, smirking like he'd already won something. They all went quiet when I entered. "Morning," I said, trying not to sound like I wanted to throw up. My dad didn't respond. Instead, he grabbed a stack of papers from in front of him and slammed it onto the table. "Did you write this?" I blinked. "What is that?" He shoved it closer. "You tell me." I recognized the format. It was a draft contract for my project. I'd submitted a version last week, but this looked off. I flipped through quickly. Figures were wrong. Sections were rearranged. "I never sent this," I said quietly. "You signed it." Number I submitted a draft through the internal portal. "This isn't mine." "You submitted it," he snapped. "It went to legal. It almost went to the damn client. If Ronan hadn't caught it, we'd be giving away half the shipping division for pennies." "That's not possible." I double-checked the valuation models. "You didn't check anything." His voice was rising. "You rushed it. You didn't even ask legal to review before sending it out." "That's not true." "Then explain this." He jabbed the page with his finger. I opened my mouth, but no words came. I couldn't explain something I didn't do. And then it happened. His voice dropped low, not quiet, but sharp, like a punch between the ribs. "You're retarded, Melanie." Silence. Nobody moved. Even the hum of the ceiling lights felt louder than the room. My skin burned. My ears rang. My breath caught in my throat. Ronan looked down, barely containing a smirk. My mother, sitting at the far end, didn't even flinch. She just picked up her coffee and took a sip. I stood there like a statue, wishing I could rewind time or disappear. But I wasn't a kid anymore. There was no hiding behind school or excuses. I had made it here, to this table, to this company, and now my own father had humiliated me in front of the board. No one spoke up, not one person. He leaned back, folded his arms, and said nothing more. I gathered the papers, slowly, carefully, so they wouldn't see my hands shaking. I nodded like I understood. Then I turned and walked out. I don't remember the elevator ride. I just remember the silence. And then he said it, loud enough to echo in my bones. "You're retarded!" I didn't cry in the elevator, not even when the doors shut and I was finally alone. But my throat felt raw, like I'd swallowed something too sharp to name. I drove straight home, hands clenched tight on the wheel. The office building faded behind me in the rearview mirror, but his words didn't. "You're retarded!" I replayed it, again and again, like some broken loop I couldn't escape. He'd said it like it wasn't the first time he'd thought it, just the first time he let it slip. Lake Forest looked exactly as it always had. Too perfect, too quiet, too fake. The sun was already sinking behind the rows of manicured trees as I pulled up to the gate. I typed in the code. Nothing happened. I tried again, still locked. My phone buzzed. A message from the household system. Access suspended. Contact admin. At first, I thought it was a glitch. Then I saw him, Gregory, my father's assistant, standing by the front steps, holding an envelope. He didn't wave, just stood there, waiting, like this was any other delivery. I stepped out of the car slowly, leaving my bag behind. "What's this?" I asked, even though I already knew. He didn't answer, just handed me the envelope and stepped back. I opened it. Inside was a single sheet, formal letterhead, stiff tone. 6-month severance package, immediate offboarding, one-way ticket to Portland. Departure, 8:05 a.m. Portland? I'd never even been. "What the hell is this?" My voice came out hoarse. Footsteps behind me. My mother. She looked composed. Red lipstick, silk blouse, not a single hair out of place. Just like always. "We thought it would be best to give you some space," she said softly. "Space?" "You're kicking me out of my own home." My voice cracked. "You'll have a chance to reset," she said, like we were discussing yoga retreats. "It's not forever." I laughed. A short, bitter thing that didn't sound like me. "You know he called me retarded in front of the entire board today, right?" She blinked, lips parting slightly. But she didn't look shocked. She looked tired. "He's under a lot of pressure." I took a step back. "So that makes it okay?" "Melanie, don't make this harder than it already is." "No," I said. "You already did that for me." I turned to leave, then stopped short. There, parked just beyond the hedge line, was Ronan's car. Engine running, windows up, in the passenger seat, my mother's handbag. I stared, confused for a moment. Then the passenger window rolled down. My mother walked toward the car, silent, slid into the seat. Ronan said something I couldn't hear, and she smiled. That was when it hit me. This wasn't panic. This wasn't a last-minute fallout from Dad losing it. This was planned. I don't remember getting back to my car, just the sick, hot flush crawling up my spine as I turned the key. I didn't even know where I was going. All I knew was that I couldn't stay. By the time I got back to the city, it was dark. I booked a room at a mid-range hotel, the kind with floral bedspreads and plastic-wrapped cups. The clerk didn't ask questions, and I was too tired to offer any. I sat on the bed, opened the envelope again. Folded behind the flight itinerary was another paper I hadn't seen before. My resignation letter. Typed. Signed. Stamped. Except I hadn't written it. And the signature? It wasn't mine. I stared at the letter in my hands for a long time. Longer than I'd like to admit. The fake resignation sat there in black ink and crisp formatting, as if it had waited patiently for me to find it. Everything about it felt wrong. The font wasn't my usual choice. The spacing was off, just slightly, but I would have noticed. And the signature. It looked like mine, but not how I signed under pressure. It was too clean, too smooth. It was the kind of signature someone would copy and paste, not write. That was the moment something inside me stopped breaking and started shifting. I wasn't just being punished, I was being erased. The room around me was too quiet. I could hear every creak in the ceiling, the low hum of the fridge in the hallway, even the distant buzz of traffic outside the hotel's foggy window. I set the papers down on the bedspread and sat back, trying to breathe evenly. Something about all of this didn't sit right, and hadn't for days. I grabbed my laptop and opened it, letting the familiar sound of the startup chime ground me. Then I logged into my secure drive, the one I kept off the company grid, where I backed up everything I worked on that mattered. But before I searched for anything, I paused, remembering something else. Last week, a random Tuesday morning, around 10:15, I'd been working on financial projections for the shipping division when my system suddenly logged me out. Locked me out, actually. Every file vanished. My access badge stopped working too. I'd chalked it up to a software glitch. Ronan even laughed it off. "Must be one of those tech hiccups," he'd said, smiling like a wolf in a cashmere suit. "Just reboot. It's probably just cleaning the pipes." Cleaning the pipes. He made everything sound like a joke, like I was overreacting for expecting basic functionality. Later that same day, I was removed from the main project Slack channel. A day after that, I wasn't on the invite list for the final presentation rehearsal. When I asked about it, HR said they had no visibility into departmental shifts. At the time, I had tried to convince myself I was just slipping through the cracks of a fast-moving system. Now, it was obvious. The cracks were created for me to fall through. I leaned forward, clicked open my files, and found my last version of the contract, the one I had finalized and saved the day before the legal review. Line by line, I scanned through it. My formatting, my numbers, my legal clauses. And then I opened the PDF my father had waved at me in the boardroom. The differences weren't glaring, but they were there. Clause 4.2, deleted. Line item values, cut in half. Language, altered, restructured, diluted. Someone had tampered with my document, not just edited it, sabotaged it. I needed answers, and I only knew one person who might have them. Dana, my assistant, the only one who had direct access to my inbox, calendar, and files. The one who used to bring me coffee without asking, and finish my sentences when I forgot where I was going mid-thought. I grabbed my phone and dialed. Voicemail. I tried again. Straight to voicemail. I sent a text. Nothing. Then I opened her Instagram. Last active, 3 hours ago. I messaged her. It didn't go through. Blocked. I dropped the phone onto the bed like it had burned me. They got to her, too. I felt the rage rising. Not the explosive kind, but the kind that burned low and steady in my chest. I wasn't just being removed. I was being framed. Cleanly, quietly, strategically. I walked to the small desk by the window, opened my laptop again, and clicked open my encrypted archive. One I hadn't touched since grad school. Back then, I'd created a habit. Every file I ever worked on, I kept a mirror copy. Timestamps, original file paths, proof. I wasn't sure what I'd find, but I knew where to start. And if they wanted me gone, they should have done a better job deleting the original me. I hadn't planned to stay up all night, but sleep never came, and by the time the first streak of gray cut through the city skyline, my laptop was surrounded by a maze of open windows, contracts, time logs, backup folders, message threads. 2 versions of the contract sat side by side on my screen. My version, meticulous, clean, properly formatted. Every clause aligned, every valuation triple-checked. I'd poured 3 weeks of my life into that draft. The other version, the one shown to the board, was a mess in disguise. A butchered copy, clauses sliced away like fat. Key figures halved. Even the language felt wrong, like someone had run my words through a blender and smoothed it out just enough to pass a glance. But not my eyes. I knew my work, and this was someone else's hand pretending to be mine. There was no room for doubt now. I wasn't sloppy. I was set up. The adrenaline that had carried me through the night was fading, replaced by the cold throb of fatigue. But before I let my body crash, I needed to know one more thing. The email. the one that supposedly sent the contract to legal. I dug through my archive and found no record of that email ever leaving my inbox. I was obsessive about logging correspondence, especially with legal, but there was nothing. I remembered Ronan making a snide comment in the kitchen one day. "Paper trails are only useful when you control the paper." I'd laughed at the time. Now it made my stomach turn. I checked my smartwatch, an old habit I never broke, even when I hated the look of it. I pulled up my location history. At the exact time the email was supposedly sent from my work account, I was 2 miles across town at a supplier meeting. My GPS showed me at the corner of Randolph and Clinton, time-stamped and geotagged. I cross-referenced it with the email metadata the board had reviewed. According to the internal report, the email came from my company device, at my desk, logged in under my name. Except I wasn't there. My smartwatch proved it. But when I tried to retrieve my company system logs, they were gone, wiped, clean, as if I'd never been there at all. Somebody had scrubbed the timeline, erased my alibi, and the only way they could do that was with access I no longer had. I sat still for a few seconds, letting the weight of it settle into my bones. Whoever did this didn't just want me out. They wanted to make sure no one remembered I was ever in. I stood up, stretched my stiff legs, and poured myself a glass of water from the courtesy pitcher on the dresser. My hands weren't shaking anymore. I wasn't confused. I wasn't scared. I was done hoping this would fix itself. I walked back to the desk, sat down, and opened a blank message draft. To Ronan Varel at varelglobal.com. Subject: Curious. Do you remember what you said about paper trails? I stared at the blinking cursor. Then I deleted the message. He didn't deserve a warning. Instead, I opened a folder titled Red Flag Legal Backup and began copying files onto a private drive. I encrypted everything with a new passcode, one I'd never used at work. Halfway through the upload, my phone buzzed. Blocked number, one new message. I almost ignored it, but something made me open it. Don't trust anyone, not even her. My spine stiffened. There was no name, just a single character at the bottom of the message. E. I stared at the message for a full minute before locking my phone and sliding it under the pillow. My heart wasn't racing anymore, just beating steadily, like it had made a decision long before I caught up to it. By the next morning, I was on a train headed east. I didn't tell anyone. There was no one to tell. Boston felt like the right kind of place to disappear. Familiar enough from school days, distant enough from my family's reach. I rented a desk in a shared office downtown, something anonymous with frosted glass doors and quiet people who didn't ask questions. I set up my laptop, opened my folders, and forced myself to start from the beginning. To move forward, I had to go back, to the moment it all collapsed. It was the morning of the final presentation. I'd been up since 4 a.m., rehearsing numbers in my head, checking last-minute adjustments. My laptop, solid as ever, suddenly froze. Completely unresponsive. I remember tapping the screen like an idiot, willing it to reboot. Nothing. Bad timing, huh? Ronan's voice had drifted in from the hallway, too casual. He walked in, holding a printed stack of papers. Don't worry, I've got a copy right here. You emailed it to me last night, remember? Except I hadn't. But in the chaos of the moment, of the room filling with board members, my dad barking about punctuality, my anxiety fogging everything, I took the papers. I was too proud, too scared to admit I wasn't ready. I flipped to the executive summary and felt my gut twist. The language was off. Some of the metrics looked deflated. But I told myself it was nerves, that I was being paranoid. I used that version. The version Ronan handed me. The same one that got me fired. Now, 1 week later, sitting under sterile white lights and the hum of someone else's coffee machine, I reopened the file chain. I compared the document I'd saved on my external drive to the printed version from that morning. The file Ronan gave me? It wasn't just altered. It had been created 2 hours after I'd submitted my final. The metadata was clear. Time-stamped edits, file name variants, no digital signature. My version had every checkpoint logged. His had none. I opened the print version and held it beside mine. Paragraphs reordered. Clause 5.6 entirely missing. Fonts inconsistent. Margins off. Sloppy work, if you were looking. And that was the point. No one had been meant to look. They expected me to fall apart quietly. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I just sat there, teeth clenched, rereading every line with a stillness that felt surgical. They forged my mistake. And they handed it to me like a loaded gun, knowing I'd fire it into my own foot. But they forgot one thing. I keep records. I composed an email to the legal team. 2 sentences. No accusations. Just questions. Can you confirm who authorized the revised contract draft presented at the March 2nd meeting? I'd like to verify the final formatting source. I hit send. Then I waited. 20 hours later, my phone rang. Mel? Ronan's voice. Too smooth, too fast. Hey, I got a ping from legal. They said you were asking questions. Just wanted to check in, you know? I didn't respond. Look, I know things got out of hand, and maybe Dad was a little harsh. But you've got to understand, there was pressure. It wasn't personal. Still silent. You okay? That's when I spoke. You really shouldn't have. And I hung up. It had been 4 weeks since I left Chicago behind. 4 weeks since I slammed the door on that call with Ronan. I thought the anger would dull with time. It didn't. Instead, it turned into something sharper, something useful. Boston gave me space. I rented a small unit above a wine bar in the North End, cozy enough to work from, anonymous enough to feel safe. My days were quiet, predictable. Research in the morning, encrypted calls with potential partners in the afternoon, cold meals at night. But it was the mailbox downstairs that changed everything. One afternoon, after a long call with a maritime logistics contact in Singapore, I found a cream-colored envelope wedged between credit card offers and pizza coupons. My name was written in familiar, blocky handwriting I hadn't seen since I was a teenager. Inside was a single page. No signature, no return address, just a message in Ephraim's hand. They've underestimated the one I taught best. Do not trust email. They're watching everything. Use what I gave you. For a moment, I just sat on the stairwell, letter in hand, fingers trembling slightly. I hadn't heard from my grandfather since the day I was escorted out of the boardroom. Everyone thought he was too old, too tired to care anymore. They didn't know him. He never stopped watching. And clearly, he hadn't stopped protecting me either. The next morning, I registered a company under a name I'd scribbled in the margins of my grad school notebooks years ago. Phoenix Navigation Solutions. A rebirth. A rise. Quiet, unassuming, but sharp where it counted. I hired 3 people. None of them from Chicago. No resumes that could be traced back to Varel. Just scrappy, brilliant, hungry minds who liked puzzles and hated bureaucracy. We set up shop in a co-working loft with brick walls and terrible coffee. But it was ours. We worked quietly, with no press, no LinkedIn posts, just data, trade flows, port traffic, licensing renewals, and one clause, 23.4b, printed and pinned above my desk. In the event of restructuring or asset transfer, the original signatory shall maintain first right of refusal for all Pacific Rim shipping routes and associated infrastructure. Buried in corporate legalese, nearly invisible, but not to me. A week after Phoenix launched, I received another letter from Ephraim. No greeting, no pleasantries. Watch the Singapore deal. They're overstating asset value. The real leverage is in the port access. Jakarta and Cebu are next. You know what to do. I didn't need translation. It was a game of dominoes, and I was watching them line up. Every few days, more letters came. No digital trail, no proof he existed in this plan. Just paper, ink, and intent. Trust no one, he wrote once, especially the ones who smile too easily. I thought of my mother, her calm voice handing me a plane ticket out of the house, the way she sat in Ronan's passenger seat that night. Not confused, not conflicted, comfortable. They'd all made their choice. Now I was making mine. Each note from Ephraim was another breadcrumb. Each one pulled back the curtain a little more. I stopped thinking like a victim. I started thinking like an architect. On a Thursday night, the office was empty. My team had gone home. I was alone with the hum of the city outside and the soft tap of a highlighter against my desk. I took the original board contract, the one they claimed I'd ruined, and pinned it next to mine. Then I pulled out the clause. 23.4b, circled it in red, underlined it, and whispered aloud just once. Your mistake was thinking I wouldn't come back. 10 years passed. Not slowly, not gently, but with enough distance for me to sharpen the edges they once tried to file down. The morning I returned to Chicago, the city skyline didn't feel the same. I wasn't here for nostalgia. I wasn't here for closure. I came to finish what they started. The law office sat on the 33rd floor, overlooking the river, sleek, polished, impersonal, like most of the men who used to sign my paychecks. I walked into the lobby of Caldwell & Associates in a charcoal suit, heels clicking across marble. My reflection in the glass doors didn't flinch. When the elevator opened onto the conference floor, I stepped out to silence. They were all there. Ronan at the head of the table like a prince in exile, my parents on either side. My father stone-faced, my mother dabbing at invisible tears. 3 board members sat along the wall, shifting uncomfortably. No one spoke. Until I did. Shall we begin? The attorney, Mr. Caldwell, cleared his throat. Yes. Thomas Ephraim Varell left specific instructions for how this session would proceed. Ronan scoffed. He also left a company in financial crisis. I hope this isn't going to be some dramatic stunt. I sat down across from him, unbothered. Mr. Caldwell opened the envelope. To my granddaughter, Melanie Varell, I leave all controlling interest in Varell Global, including but not limited to voting rights, majority shareholding, and full operational authority. The air left the room. Ronan laughed once, short, bitter. That's not possible. The shares were supposed to transfer to me. The board approved it. Mr. Caldwell didn't blink. The board was not informed of the full terms of Ephraim's private trust. Those terms override all internal policies. My father leaned forward. This isn't legal. Mr. Caldwell pulled out another folder. What's illegal is document tampering, vote rigging, and falsified termination records. He slid the folder across the table. Included here are original contracts, employee emails, internal edits, and a forensic audit, proving that Melanie was removed under false pretenses. I reached into my briefcase and placed my version of the shipping contract on the table. Clause 23.4b, highlighted in yellow. Here's the original document, with timestamp, with my digital signature, the one you erased. I glanced toward Ronan. And here's the one you printed for me when my laptop just happened to crash. He said nothing. Mr. Caldwell continued, his voice even. The clause she included grants her first right of refusal on all Pacific Rim routes, which, given the upcoming restructuring and licensing deals in Singapore, Jakarta, and Cebu, means she controls the most valuable segment of Varell Global's operations. The board erupted into hushed arguments. My mother whispered something to my father. His jaw tightened. Ronan just stared. I stood up. You all know what this means. Without my consent, the restructuring fails. Without the restructuring, you default on 3 major loans. Without those loans, well, I assume your investors are already asking questions. I turned to the board. I won't stop the restructure. I'll lead it, but not with the people who tried to bury me. Silence. My mother reached for me. Melanie, this isn't necessary. I cut her off without raising my voice. I'm not here for revenge, Mother. I'm here for correction. She blinked, swallowed, and said nothing more. I picked up my folder, slipped it back into my briefcase, and turned to Ronan. You have until 5 p.m. to clear your office. I'm moving in tomorrow. He didn't speak, not a word. just stared at me like I was someone he'd never met. 1 week later, I walked back into the building they once dragged me out of. But this time, I wasn't flanked by silence and shame. This time, I moved with intent. The lobby of Varel Global was buzzing. Not loud, not chaotic, just filled with the kind of uneasy static that fills the air when something big is about to happen, and everyone feels it, but no one says it. I didn't need an announcement. People looked up. Phones were lowered mid-scroll. Conversations paused mid-sentence. And then someone whispered, not even trying to be discreet, "That's her." The receptionist stood as I approached. "Welcome back, Ms. Varel." I didn't smile, just nodded once and stepped into the elevator. Alone. 32 floors, and not a single regret. The elevator chimed open to the executive suite. Familiar corridor, same sterile walls. But this time, the air didn't push against me, it made way. Ronan's door was already open. He was inside, sleeves rolled up, shoving papers into a box. His usually slick hair was out of place, shirt wrinkled, confidence cracked. He didn't look at me right away, just said, "Guess you're early." "I always was." He glanced up, gave me a half smile, like we were back in the break room years ago, and this was all just a misunderstanding. "Look, Melanie." "No," I stepped in. "You don't get to lead with charm. You don't get to act like you didn't watch me drown and hand me the anchor." His jaw tensed. "I made mistakes, all right? I didn't think it would go that far, Dad." "Don't blame Dad," I cut in. "You didn't just fire me. You erased me from files, from meetings, from my own family, and you smiled while doing it." He exhaled through his nose slowly. "I was scared of losing everything." "And now you have." I slid the envelope across his desk. "Board endorsed. Legal's already signed off. You're out of operations for 5 years. No advisory role, no assets, non-compete locked in." "You're freezing me out." "I'm giving you what you gave me, but I'm doing it legally." He swallowed, eyes flickering to the papers. "You win then." I shook my head. "This isn't a game anymore. It never should have been." He didn't argue. He just nodded once, tight and bitter, and went back to packing. I left the office without looking back. But I didn't get far. My parents were waiting in the executive lounge. My mother stood first. "Melanie, please." She looked tired in a way I hadn't seen before, not from age, from truth. "I didn't know everything. I thought they were protecting the company." "You were in the car," I said flatly, "with Ronan, the night I was thrown out." She blinked. "It wasn't like that." "It was exactly like that." My father cleared his throat. "Mel, you've made your point, but let's be smart about this. The company needs unity. We can talk." I stepped closer. "You chose him. You chose loyalty to a version of the company that died the day you told me I wasn't good enough." He looked away. Couldn't meet my eyes. "I'm not here to fight anymore," I continued, "but I won't pretend we're okay. Not now. Maybe not ever." I walked past them and opened the door to what used to be my grandfather's office. Now it was mine. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I placed one thing on the desk before sitting down. The framed original contract, the one they tried to use to break me, and all I could think was, they built this throne from fire and lies, but I'm the one who rose from the ashes. 3 weeks had passed since I walked into this office with the weight of 10 years trailing behind me. Now, I sat at the same desk my grandfather once ruled from, not as an heir, because heirs wait, but as a builder, a restorer. A woman who came back not for blood, but for balance. The quarterly reports were stacked neatly beside my coffee mug. Numbers were steady. Staff morale was up. Rumors had quieted. The board had fallen into line faster than I expected. Part fear, part relief. No one asked about Ronan anymore. Phoenix Navigation had merged into Varel's logistics division without friction. My team, my people, were now at the core of every strategic discussion, bringing insight no spreadsheet could fake. I didn't need applause. I needed stability, and I had it. I stood up from the desk and walked to the window. The skyline stretched like it always had, glass and steel reflecting a world that never stopped spinning. I had changed, but the city hadn't. And maybe that was okay. Every Friday, without fail, a bouquet of white lilies arrived at reception. No note, but I knew the handwriting on the delivery slip, my mother. I never replied. Last week, my father requested a meeting through my assistant. I didn't take it. Then there was Ronan. He'd sent one email, subject line, "I'm sorry, I didn't open it. I didn't need to." Closure doesn't always come with conversations. Sometimes it's just silence that holds. I wasn't cruel, I just understood, finally, what they never had. Blood means nothing without truth. Family is not made of last names, it's made of choices. Mine had spoken loudly for years. And now, so had I. I turned back to my desk and reached for a small velvet envelope I had locked in the bottom drawer. It was the last letter from Ephraim, dated 1 month before his death. It had been marked to be delivered only after the will was read. I unfolded the paper, hands steady. "Melanie, queens don't wait for crowns, they build their own. And they do it not to be seen, but to lead. You were never a pawn, never a mistake, just a threat they underestimated. Don't become what they feared, become what they needed." I folded the letter carefully, placed it back in its envelope, and returned it to the drawer. Then I stood, walked to the door, and took one last look at the framed contract on the wall, the same one they tried to use to break me. It didn't symbolize revenge anymore. It represented survival and evolution. I stepped into the boardroom, where the next meeting was about to begin. No heads turned in surprise this time, no sideways glances, just acknowledgement, and something more powerful than any title: respect. Some stories don't end with revenge. They end with understanding who you are, no matter who refused to see it. I used to believe loyalty was owed, especially to those we call family. But I learned the hard way. Loyalty that costs you your identity isn't love, it's control. Being underestimated hurt. Being betrayed by blood, that shattered me. But here's the truth. Sometimes the people who break you are also the reason you rebuild stronger. This isn't just a story about revenge or business. It's about knowing your worth even when no one else does. It's about fighting for the truth even when it costs you everything. And above all, it's about choosing who you become, no matter who tried to define you. So maybe now it's your turn to ask yourself, have you ever been told you weren't enough by your own family? Have you ever walked away from something toxic to build something better? If so, you're not alone. And I'd love to hear your voice. Drop a 1 in the comments if this story touched something inside you. Tell me where you're watching from. Let's connect. If this video didn't hit you the same way, tell me why. I welcome every perspective. And hey, if you're still watching, take a second to subscribe. This channel shares stories that challenge, inspire, and remind you that even when life burns everything down, you can rise again, smarter, stronger, and on your own terms. See you in the next story. Hello, my name's Marjorie. My sister fired me the same week she took over our father's company. No warning, no conversation. Just gone. Like I'd never mattered. But it wasn't just about the job. It was everything that came before it. The silence, the favoritism, the way they smiled to my face while planning my exit behind closed doors. They called her the Golden One. So why was I the only one holding the signature they needed? And if I had stayed quiet, would they have erased me completely? What do you do when your own family treats you like a placeholder? Let me tell you what happened next. It was Sunday morning, and the kitchen smelled like toast and that cinnamon candle I'd forgotten to put out. I was halfway through my second cup of coffee when my phone buzzed with a calendar notification. Family Board Transition Meeting, Saturday. Saturday, past tense. I blinked at the screen, unsure if it was some glitch. But no, it was real. I hadn't seen the invite, hadn't heard a word. I refreshed my email, checked my spam, even reopened the family group chat. Nothing. I sat still for a moment. A strange kind of quiet crawled up my spine. Not the peaceful kind. No, this was the sound of a door closing, without ever making a sound. How do you miss a meeting you were never told existed? I tapped the mug with my thumbnail, watching the surface ripple. I wasn't sure what bothered me more, the fact that they had met without me, or that no one thought I needed to know. Maybe it wasn't a mistake. Maybe I was never meant to be there in the first place. The next morning, I got to the office early, as usual. I nodded to the receptionist, who offered a tight-lipped smile that didn't reach her eyes. Something was off. The air was different. Thinner, maybe. People passed me in the hall, but their eyes skated past mine. Even the intern who used to greet me with, "Morning, Ms. Quinn," kept her head down and pretended to be deep in conversation with the vending machine. In the break room, I poured myself a cup of black coffee. Behind me, someone whispered, not low enough. I thought she was already gone. Gone? My badge still opened doors. My name was still on the system. My desk, my files, my team. Everything was still where I left it. But the look in their eyes told a different story. They didn't need to announce it. The silence screamed louder. I headed to the legal floor, pretending I needed a form signed, anything to give my hands something to do. I passed Amanda's desk, the legal assistant, and caught a glimpse of an open folder. The letterhead was unmistakable. Roth Enterprises. The bold typeface, CEO appointment, Clarette Alden. Below it, a signature, Jeremiah Roth. Dated last Friday. That same Friday, I thought we were just having a quiet brunch at Dad's house. Scones, fresh strawberries, small talk about the garden. Turns out, while I was cutting fruit, they were cutting me out. I scanned the document again. My name wasn't listed as part of the transition, not on the advisory list, not in the transitional workflow, not even a courtesy CC. They passed the torch. I just wasn't considered flammable enough to burn. I backed away from Amanda's desk without a word. My fingers tingled like I'd just touched a live wire. I walked to the elevator, each step slower than the last. No one stopped me. No one called my name. Inside, I pressed the button for the ground floor and watched the numbers count down. 13, 12, 11. I wasn't crying. I wasn't even blinking, just breathing in a way that didn't feel like breathing anymore. They chose her. They always do. My phone buzzed again. I didn't want to look, but I did. From Clarette Alden, subject, team realignment session, mandatory attendance time, Monday, 8 m sharp. Mandatory. How generous. She hadn't spoken to me in person, hadn't sent a courtesy call, but she made sure to schedule me in. For a realignment. The only thing colder than being forgotten is being summoned, like a ghost, back into the room that erased you. I didn't sleep much that night. The kind of tired I felt didn't come from lack of rest. It came from knowing the morning would ask me to stand in a room that had already decided I didn't belong. I laid out my clothes like I was preparing for trial, not a team meeting. I didn't choose black, too dramatic. I wore navy, structured, sharp, unapologetic. By the time I pulled into the parking garage, the sun hadn't fully cleared the rooftops. I sat in the car a moment longer than necessary, watching a pair of junior analysts walking in, laughing. Neither of them looked my way. Upstairs, the boardroom lights were already on. Everyone was in their seat, coffee cups placed neatly on the table, folders stacked. Clarette stood at the head of the table, perfectly composed in a fitted blazer I'd seen her wear for photo ops. She didn't glance up when I walked in. No nod, no acknowledgement. I took the empty seat near the end, my usual spot. I didn't need to look around to feel the shift in air. This wasn't a meeting, it was an unveiling. She cleared her throat softly. Before we begin, there are some changes we'll be implementing immediately. No one looked surprised. That's when I knew they already knew. She announced a reshuffle of departments, some roles merged, some made redundant. Then she turned directly toward me. Marjorie, we thank you for your years of service, but we're moving forward with a different structure. Effective today, your role has been absorbed. Absorbed. She said it like it was nothing, like it was an outdated feature being removed from a software update. No explanation, no discussion, just done. I didn't blink. I didn't speak. I could feel the eyes in the room bouncing between us, trying to look anywhere but directly at me. One man tapped his pen. Another slowly closed his laptop. The only sound was the distant hum of the AC vent overhead. I nodded once, short, clean, and stood. Back in my office, I didn't find an HR rep waiting. No formal paperwork, just a system-generated termination email sitting in my inbox. I read it twice, then closed it. There was nothing in there I didn't already feel. I began packing without urgency. My things didn't take up much space. A framed photo of my mother and me. A small stack of old client thank you notes I'd kept pinned to a corkboard. The magnolia branch paperweight a client had brought me from Savannah. A few personal books. I reached for the whiteboard behind my desk, covered in notes and flowcharts, then stopped. Let them wipe it. When I walked back out into the hall, it felt quieter than usual, though I knew it probably wasn't. I passed the employee recognition wall. My plaque, Strategic Leader of the Year, was gone. In its place, a fresh new face beamed back at me from a shiny brass frame. Not surprising, just fast. The lobby smelled like polished floors and filtered air. I stepped outside, blinking against the sun. It was warm, the kind of warm that sticks to your skin. I sat in my car, not turning the engine on right away. The building stood behind me, like a closed door I hadn't realized was shutting. No one stood up for me, not one of them. Not even the ones I'd trained. The ones I stayed late for, spoke up for in meetings, shielded from fallout when things went sideways. But I didn't cry. If I meant so little to them, why were they so quick to pretend I was never there? I didn't drive home. I wasn't ready to be alone in that kind of quiet. Instead, I took a turn and headed toward the public park near the river. The one my mother used to love. We'd sat on that same bench when I got my first promotion. She brought iced tea in a thermos, and we watched ducks pick through the grass like they had secrets worth sharing. The bench was still there. The tree hadn't changed. I sat down slowly, the wood warm from the morning sun. I let my shoulders relax for the first time that day. I didn't talk, didn't vent. I just breathed in the scent of river water and fresh-cut grass. After a while, I pulled a small notebook from my bag. Flipping past a few pages, I stopped at a blank one and wrote a single word in the middle. Evidence. Not revenge. Not justice. Just truth. Something to hold when everything else felt like it could be edited out. As I capped the pen, my phone lit up. Lucinda Marks. The name surprised me. It had been over a year since we'd spoken. Lucinda was my mother's estate lawyer, and someone who never called unless something needed protection or exposure. Lucinda didn't leave a voicemail, just her name lighting up on my screen like a question I wasn't ready to answer. I let it go to missed calls, then stared at the log for almost a full minute. She didn't call often, never without cause. I figured whatever reason she had could wait until I'd gathered myself enough to think clearly. The rest of the week passed in a strange mix of inertia and raw clarity. I didn't return to the office. There was no office left for me to return to. But I still had access to the company portal, and for reasons I couldn't explain, maybe force of habit, maybe sheer pride. I logged in each morning just to see what would change next. That's how I found out about the upcoming quarterly presentation. Internal livestream, Friday at 10. My name wasn't on the schedule, obviously, but I knew the deck, knew it down to the order of the slides, because I had built the foundation of that roadmap myself. Friday morning, I walked to the cafe 2 blocks from my building. It had wide windows and a quiet corner seat where the noise never quite reached. I ordered a black coffee and a lemon scone. No cream, no sugar. I set my laptop on the table and connected to the Wi-Fi. I told myself I wouldn't watch, but the window opened on its own, like muscle memory. The Roth Company's logo spun in the corner of the screen. Then Clarette appeared, smooth and polished, In a blazer I recognized from a magazine spread she'd done on modern women in leadership. Her posture was pristine, her voice rehearsed. Thank you for joining us this quarter as we redefine what progress means. The screen behind her shifted to the first slide. Growth Roadmap, 2022. My roadmap, my format. The layout I'd spent late nights refining after budget meetings, the one I'd crafted after interviewing clients personally. But there was no mention of me. No nod to the person who built the bones of the strategy. Instead, she smiled and said, "Our new leadership team has worked hard to rethink legacy systems. Innovation must be bold and collaborative." The next image hit harder. A snapshot of the whiteboard from my old office. My handwriting still visible. I remembered the day it was taken. We'd stayed until after 9 p.m., mapping projections, running calculations. I brought pizza. They brought excuses to leave early. Now, that board was evidence, not of my work, but of Clarette's version of team synergy. I closed the window, not out of anger, just because I couldn't give them the courtesy of watching it all. Later, I found myself driving without destination. I passed by the Roth headquarters, out of habit more than intention. The building looked shinier than I remembered, like someone had wiped away fingerprints and memories in one go. 2 new junior execs were taking a selfie in front of the entrance banner. Bold vision, clear future. No one would believe I ever stood at that lobby greeting partners from overseas, explaining the foundation we built. They'd scrubbed that too. Back at home, I turned off my phone and opened the drawer where I kept a forgotten USB. I had labeled it 2 years ago. MQ Roadmap V1. The original project outline. Every milestone, annotated and logged. Slide drafts, voice notes, handwritten memos scanned in from my desk pad. I stared at the timestamps. I hadn't opened these in months. But there they were. Undeniable. And still, not once had anyone called to ask for input. Not even a, "Hey, do you mind if we build on what you did?" I scrolled through line after line. My name, embedded in drafts. Comments tracked back to my logins. But in the real world, the world that was now visible to investors, clients, and new hires, I was invisible. I sat back in my chair. Eyes closed. Had I made it too easy to erase me? Or had they always been waiting for the moment I let my guard down? Around midnight, I found myself still sitting at the desk, the laptop screen dimmed but open. I hadn't eaten dinner, hadn't checked messages. I didn't want to talk. I just wanted to remember, not to hurt, but to prove to myself that I hadn't imagined the years I gave them. The sound of an email arriving pulled me back. Subject line: Clarette Alden recognized as visionary CEO behind company turnaround. Internal newsletter. No CC, no personalization. Just a quote, mine, from last year's town hall, repackaged under her name. I didn't react, just saved the article. You can be erased in public, but still exist in the margins of the truth. I didn't touch the article again after saving it. I just let it sit there, unopened, like a scar that hadn't scabbed over. The weekend stretched out ahead of me, quiet and unfinished. I spent Saturday morning cleaning, not because the place needed it, but because I did. Scrubbing down surfaces made more sense than replaying conversations I'd never be able to change. By the time late afternoon settled in, the windows were throwing amber streaks across the floor. I poured a glass of water, sat down at my desk, and opened my hard drive. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just wanted to feel like I still had pieces of myself archived somewhere. And then, there it was. Folder labeled Kingswell Final Drafts. I hadn't opened it since before Dad stepped down. Inside, a file named Kingswell Draft V3, authorized MQ PDF. I clicked. It opened slowly, like it too was trying to decide whether it should exist. The timestamp? Dated 3 weeks before Clarette's announcement as CEO. The signature page? Marked clearly with my name. Not just as a contributor, but as the sole authorized signatory. A clause buried in the final section cited international jurisdictional protections, assigning me, by name, as the only person legally able to execute the final agreement. They didn't just need a team, they needed me. The roadmap, the forecasts, the translation footnotes, all mine. The deal hadn't closed. It was still in pending status, and according to the protocol I helped establish, they couldn't move forward without me. So while Clarette was busy reinventing the company in her image, she'd overlooked the fact that her crown sat on a document with my name at the bottom. I closed the file and sat back. No smile, no triumph, just breath. They had used my voice, my strategy, my structure. Without realizing the foundation was still under my control, I opened my browser and checked internal communications. No one else had touched the Kingswell deal. No reassignment logged. No new point of contact. It had simply stalled. After a moment, I pulled up an old contact, Amir, a Kingswell representative I'd met over coffee at a trade summit 2 years back. We'd kept our conversations professional, light, and consistent. I drafted a short message. "Hi Amir, just checking in to verify who's handling final Kingswell documentation now on your side?" His reply came 20 minutes later. "We were told you were on an extended medical leave. We've been waiting for a revised signature." No anger, no exclamation, just patience. I didn't reply. Instead, I stepped out onto my small balcony, letting the breeze pull at the corners of the curtain. From up here, the city was quiet. Boats along the river drifted like they had nowhere urgent to be. Across the water, I could just make out the top of the old port office, a building we once pitched to lease for satellite expansion. Another idea Clarette had dismissed as too legacy-minded. I stared at the skyline and felt the shift. This wasn't about revenge. I didn't want headlines or retribution. I wanted the truth to land exactly where it needed to. Not like a grenade, like gravity. They had spent weeks restructuring a future they couldn't legally finalize. All it would take was a signature, and I was the only one allowed to give it. Back inside, I opened the notebook again. The word evidence sat on the top of the page like a heading. Underneath, I wrote, "Kingswell Leverage, do not move yet. Amir contact, keep confidential, document timestamp, verified." I underlined the last line twice. Then I stopped, closed the book. Clarette thought she had the kingdom. But the throne? That was still built on paper I never signed. Just before shutting down my screen, a calendar notification popped up. Kingswell Board Review, Thursday, 10 a.m. Still listed. Still active. No one had removed me. I didn't need to announce anything, not yet. Sometimes power wasn't about speaking louder. It was about being the quiet reason the room couldn't move forward. The calendar alert stayed on my screen like it was daring me to ignore it. I didn't. I opened a new browser tab, logged into the company's backend system, and let myself scroll through what I shouldn't have had access to anymore. That's when I saw it. My name. Still listed as the authorized signatory on the Kingswell contract. Still attached to the deal Clarette claimed was already done. But it wasn't just still active, it was marked completed. I froze. Not in fear, in calculation. I hadn't signed anything. It was late, just past 9 p.m., but I called Amir anyway. He picked up after 2 rings. "Marjorie," he said cautiously, "I wasn't sure I'd hear from you." I didn't waste time. "Did the contract go through?" There was a short pause, the kind that told me the answer would sting. "Technically, yes. We received a copy with your name on it last week, but honestly, we were hoping you'd follow up. Something felt off." "Send me the file," I said. "Please." It hit my inbox 5 minutes later. The document looked official. The formatting was identical to the one I'd drafted. The cover page was intact. Everything was where it should have been. Until I scrolled down to the final page. My signature stared back at me. Not scanned, not digital, handwritten. It looked close, uncomfortably close, but it wasn't mine. And that was the moment everything changed. I printed 3 copies, one for myself, one for legal, one for whoever tried to lie to my face. The next morning, I drove to Dad's house. Not the office, not the park, not some passive email. This needed to happen face to face. He answered the door, wearing that same old cardigan he always kept in the hallway closet. He looked tired. Not aged, just burdened. We sat in the sunroom. He poured coffee for both of us without asking, like we were still in the version of our family where things were civil. I placed the contract on the table. He read the signature first. Then his eyes scanned the clause I'd underlined in red, the one that made it clear I was the only authorized signer. He didn't say anything right away, just adjusted his glasses and leaned back. "I didn't know," he said finally. "No, you didn't ask." He set the paper down gently, like it might bite. "Why would she do this?" he asked. But it was rhetorical, and we both knew it. "She wants to win," I said, "even if it means breaking things she can't rebuild." He looked away. "Maybe you should speak to her directly." "I already did," I said. "She just doesn't realize it yet." Back at home, I sat down at my desk and opened a new email. To General Counsel, subject, unauthorized contract execution, requesting immediate clarification regarding execution of contract Shakti WS Q317, currently listed under my authority. Please confirm who authorized final signature and under what documentation. I hit send. Then I waited. 3 hours later, I received a reply. "We'd like to speak with you directly." No apology, just protocol. It was enough. Later that night, just as I was folding laundry, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Clarette. "Clarette, what the hell are you doing?" I stared at the screen for a second, then typed back slowly. "Me. Something you should have done before signing my name." There was no reply. That told me everything. The problem with paper trails is, they don't burn easily. The silence after her text was louder than any reply could have been. I didn't need her to admit it. The forged signature, the cover-up, the arrogance. It was all there. Between the lines she didn't send. The next morning started slow. The kind of quiet where even the refrigerator hum felt sharp. I was halfway through my second cup of coffee when my phone rang. Not a text, a direct call. Elroy Vance. I hadn't heard from him since the last board dinner I'd been pushed out of without explanation. He never called without a reason, I answered. "Elroy." "Marjorie," he said, voice low, clipped. "I won't waste your time." "Good," I said. "I'm running short on patience." He exhaled, quick and audible. "There's movement. Clarette's been in talks with 2 private buyers. She's pushing through a partial equity release under something called Roth Holdings, East Division restructure." I went still. That name wasn't new. I had created it, drafted it as a long-range contingency shell for expansion. It was meant to be a tool. She was now using it as a shield. She's using infrastructure I designed. "We figured as much, and she said you're no longer involved. Told the board she had your blessing." "She's lying." "I assumed." "Send me everything you have," I said. "Time, date, draft language if possible." "I'll forward what I can. But I'm telling you now, if she walks into that investor meeting tomorrow with a pitch deck, there will be consequences. They're already nervous. You know how this works. One slip." "She's already slipped," I said. "She just hasn't hit the floor yet." After the call, I logged in and went digging. My access was limited, but not gone. They'd forgotten to fully revoke back-end clearance to my archives. Rookie mistake. Folders dated 2 nights ago, file names labeled exploratory, a few stamped internal only. She'd been busy. Pitch outlines, valuation ranges, exit scenarios. Nothing approved, nothing disclosed to the full board. Just quiet threads tying everything to a single direction. Hers. I sat back, staring at a slide where my own formatting was still being used, down to the spacing between bullet points. She hadn't just taken the steering wheel. She'd stolen the whole map. I didn't call her, not yet. Instead, I walked to the window, phone in hand, and took a breath. Not shaky, not panicked, Just full. Then I dialed. She answered after 4 rings. "What now?" she asked, like I was the inconvenience. "You need to stop." "Excuse me?" "You're stepping into criminal exposure. You're selling pieces of something you don't fully own, using infrastructure you didn't build." There was a pause. Then that same syrupy confidence I'd come to recognize over the years. "You were great at building things, Marjorie. I'll give you that. But I'm better at making them valuable." My grip on the phone tightened. "You're not adding value, Clarette. You're cashing in on what someone else bled for." She laughed. "Spare me the martyr act." I didn't respond. I just hung up. No more wasted breath. I returned to my desk, opened a secure folder, and began compiling. It took me less than 30 minutes to organize the proof. I labeled it cleanly. Clear subject lines. Chronological layout. Time-stamped backups. Screenshots of draft files, side by side with originals bearing my initials. Then I encrypted the folder and sent it to 3 places. First, Kingswell Legal. Second, Elroy Vance. Third, a private auditor who once worked for my mother, someone who knew exactly where to look for paper that had been accidentally shredded. The subject line was simple: Foundation Ownership Review, Urgent. The message inside read, "My work has been misused without consent. The attached documents clarify authorship and authority. I'm not seeking a fight. I'm ensuring accuracy." After I hit send, I closed the laptop and leaned back. "She moved first," I said out loud to no one, but I kept the receipts. I didn't plan on doing anything else that night. I'd done my part. If they were going to pretend this was a game, I wanted them to realize they were already playing with loaded dice. My phone buzzed again an hour later. "Elroy. If she shows up tomorrow with a pitch deck, she'll be walking into her own audit." I stared at that message, letting the weight of it settle. When you've built something from scratch, you know exactly where to place the fuse. And when it lights, you don't run. You watch who panics first. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't toss and turn either. I just waited. Waited for something to rise in me. Anger, anxiety, regret. But it didn't come. What I felt instead was the eerie stillness of clarity, like I had finally stopped trying to make people good at being decent. Around 7:45 a.m., while the city outside my window was still waking up, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. The preview line simply read, "You should have this before tomorrow." It was from Devin Lee, an intern I once mentored 3 years ago. Back then, he was sharp, curious, and always stayed late to ask questions no one else dared to. I hadn't heard from him since he'd left for another department under Clarette's watch. I opened the message. A voice note, 1 line of text. "This was from the leadership session, recorded a year ago. You deserve to hear it." I sat down, plugged in my headphones, and pressed play. It was unmistakably Clarette. "She's good for optics. Makes Dad feel like he's leaving something behind with her around. That's why I keep her visible. She's stable, and that's useful, until she's not." Laughter followed. Not just hers. At least 3 voices in the room. I recognized one of them. Sam Delaney, now on her advisory board. Someone I personally referred when he was still freelancing 2 years ago. I replayed it, once for disbelief, again for confirmation. They didn't just remove me, they'd been planning it. And worse, they'd built their confidence on the assumption that I wouldn't fight back, that I was more useful as a placeholder than a presence. There was no rage, no heartbreak, just stillness. Later that morning, I opened my messages and sent a short note to Nadia, someone I once trusted. We used to share rides after late shifts, joke about boardroom politics, roll our eyes at executives who couldn't remember our names. My message was simple. "Still think she's going to fix everything?" 3 dots appeared, then vanished. 5 minutes passed. Then, "Please don't drag me into this. I have a family." That was the moment I stopped expecting anything from anyone still in her orbit. You don't need to be stabbed in the back when everyone's already standing behind you pretending not to see the knife. I closed the chat and walked to my desk. The folder I had built over the last few weeks sat ready. Timestamps, emails, audio, and one very old envelope that Lucinda Marks had dropped off the previous spring. I hadn't opened it back then. I didn't need to. I trusted it would matter when it was time. It was time. The Devon recording was first in the presentation deck, then the Kingswell file with my legal authority. Next, a breakdown of the shell company Clarette had tried to slide past the board, using infrastructure I had personally set up and trademarked. Finally, a copy of the clause from my mother's estate, still sealed, still binding. I didn't want to blow the room up. That would have been easy. I wanted to walk in, lay the facts down, and let the weight of them shift everything she had built with smoke and mirrors. Around 6 p.m., I walked to the park near my apartment, the one my mother loved. I sat at our old bench, beneath the same oak tree, and stared across the river. I thought of her handwriting, the way she signed her name like a woman who didn't need permission. "You're going to have to do this alone, Marjorie," she once told me, "but that doesn't mean you'll be alone forever." I stood, brushed off my coat, and made my way back home. As I walked through my door, a ping echoed from my laptop. I didn't rush to it. I made tea first, then opened the email. Subject: Updated agenda. Kingswell board meeting, 10:00 a.m. Company status update. CEO, Clarette Alden, 10:30 a.m. Independent review session, Marjorie Quinn. There it was. Official. They hadn't removed me. They hadn't dared. Not because they respected me, because they knew I still mattered. Even if they couldn't say it out loud. You can bury someone's name in the agenda, but if they show up in the minutes, it's already too late. I didn't speak a word on the drive to the Kingswell building. There was nothing left to rehearse. I'd already lived it. Every slide, every timestamp, every buried clause. They weren't strategy anymore. They were memory. The air in the boardroom was too still when I walked in. 5 minutes early, and yet somehow, they'd already settled into their chairs like they'd been waiting longer. A few side glances. No one met my eye directly. Except Clarette. She was already seated at the head of the table, wearing that pearl gray suit she always chose for victory days. Her lips curved into a polite line that didn't reach her eyes. Jeremiah sat 2 seats away, his hands folded. He didn't look surprised to see me. Just unreadable. No one said anything as I took my seat. I didn't smile. I didn't nod. I simply opened the slim leather folder I'd brought with me and placed it gently on the table. At exactly 10 o'clock, the moderator cleared his throat. "Welcome, everyone. We'll begin with a company update from our CEO, Clarette Alden." Clarette stood and launched into her presentation like it was just another quarterly review. Charts, talking points, polished metaphors. I watched her move through the deck smoothly, efficiently, until she hit the Kingswell slide. Her voice faltered for just a breath. Then she pushed on, highlighting projected revenue shifts and synergistic restructuring. Her phrasing was textbook. Her timing, rushed. I didn't blink. At 10:30, the moderator looked at me. "We'll now hear from Marjorie Quinn regarding review concerns." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I opened the folder and removed a flash drive. "Before I speak, I'd like you all to hear something." The room fell still. I played Devon's recording from my phone, hooked through the built-in speaker system. Clarette's voice filled the space. "She's good for continuity optics. Dad likes to think she's stable. That's why I keep her visible." Then laughter. I paused the audio before the second half could land harder. Silence. This wasn't a private opinion. This was spoken in a leadership session, attended by several current advisors. I handed printed transcripts down both sides of the table. Then, the forged contract. "This," I said, "is not my handwriting." I passed it alongside the original version, signatures side by side. These are not personal wounds, they're legal violations. The signature on the executed Kingswell deal was not mine, and I have never delegated authority to substitute it. I turned toward Clarette, her face set, jaw tight. "And for the record," I continued, "the Roth East shell, which was referenced in the investor pitch last week, was built using IP associated with my estate, registered, documented, and protected. No release was ever granted. No one spoke. It wasn't necessary. Then Jeremiah cleared his throat. There are mistakes, he began quietly, that a CEO makes and recovers from. And then there are mistakes a father makes that echo in his daughter's silence. He looked directly at Clarette. You weren't chosen because you were ready. You were chosen because I thought she wouldn't fight back. Then to me, I should have asked more, trusted more, listened more. I'm sorry. I said nothing. But I didn't look away. The moderator looked unsure whether to continue, but before he could speak, the side door opened. Lucinda Marks walked in, a folder in hand. She nodded to me, then addressed the board. This document was drafted by Verity Quinn 5 years ago. It outlines a contingency. Should any attempt be made to dissolve or restructure family assets, a controlling percentage of shares would transfer to Marjorie Quinn. She laid the document flat. 40%, effective immediately. No one interrupted her. Clarette's gaze stayed locked on the table. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt still. The board voted. It wasn't dramatic. A simple count. Formal, clean. Clarette was suspended, pending legal review. As the room began to clear, I gathered my things slowly. I didn't linger. Didn't need to. But in the hallway, just as I rounded the corner toward the elevator, she stopped me. You think this is over? I looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't feel small standing next to her. It ended the moment you forged my name, I said. Everything since then was just paperwork. She didn't reply. I stepped into the elevator, pressed the button. The doors closed quietly between us. Rebuilding doesn't begin with winning. It begins with remembering why you stayed quiet for so long. When the elevator doors opened on the lobby floor, I didn't walk out like someone who had won anything. I walked like someone who had stopped expecting the win to look like applause. A week passed. The kind of week where everything around you continues moving, but you feel like a ghost floating just outside of it. I didn't call anyone. I didn't rush to announce what happened. The only sound I held onto was my own breath. By the following Monday, I returned to the Roth building, not as a guest, not as a relic, not even as a story. I came in because there was work to do. There were no cameras waiting at the front entrance. No press, no board members waiting to shake hands. Just the receptionist who gave me a small nod and said, "Welcome back, Ms. Quinn." It landed softly, like something that had always been true and was finally said out loud. Upstairs, the lights were already on in the transition suite. Someone had placed a folder on my desk labeled Client Strategy, Interim Lead. Inside, files, timelines, access codes. No longer acting, no longer former. I opened the top drawer. My old pen was still there. Not everything had been erased. Around midday, an internal memo circulated, a formal note from the board summarizing the shift. Clarette was listed as suspended pending internal investigation. The wording was measured, no dramatics. But it didn't need drama. Everyone in that building knew what happened. Quiet messages trickled into my inbox. Glad you're back. You handled it better than most would have. Thanks for showing what restraint looks like. No apologies. No ownership from the ones who sat silent while I was gutted from the inside out. But something in their tone was different. Like they were writing to someone who had survived something they hadn't expected her to survive. I didn't respond to most of them. I didn't need to. They'd seen what they needed to see. Later that afternoon, Jeremiah came to my office, alone. No assistant trailing behind him, no prepared speech, just him, holding a small envelope. He placed it on the desk without sitting. It was in your mother's things, he said. She asked me to give it to you if things ever got too far. I nodded once. Then he lingered, like he might say more. But he didn't. He left the way people do when they know they've said too little, too late. I waited a long while before opening the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. My mother's handwriting filled it in blue ink, steady and elegant. "If this ever lands in your hands," it read, "I trust you'll know what to do with the weight I couldn't carry. You always had a stronger back than I did." I'm sorry I didn't say that out loud. I folded the note and slid it into the notebook where I'd once written evidence. It no longer felt like proof. It felt like closure she never got to deliver. Before heading home, I walked out through the courtyard. The building buzzed behind me, people rushing meetings, voices bouncing down hallways. But outside, it was still. I took the longer path past the east side of the property, near the garden my mother used to tend. I hadn't been there since she passed. I didn't expect much, but the magnolias were blooming, early and full. I crouched beside the one she planted the year I turned 20, ran my hand along a leaf. "You kept it going longer than anyone gave you credit for," I whispered. "I guess I did too." I stood, brushed the dirt from my hands, and exhaled. Not in grief, in recognition. The story wasn't over, but the chapter was closed. I didn't smile, but I didn't flinch either. The past hadn't vanished, but it no longer owned my name. Sometimes you don't win with noise. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is to stay steady, gather the truth, and let it speak for you. If there's one thing I've learned from all this, it's that being underestimated isn't always a weakness. It's often a gift. It gives you space to move quietly, to build quietly, and when the time comes, to rise without needing permission. To anyone out there who's ever been overlooked, erased, or told to be grateful for being included, let me tell you this. Your presence is not a favor, it's a foundation. You don't owe anyone your silence just because they're more comfortable without your voice. And now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever stayed quiet just to keep the peace, only to realize it cost you more than your voice? Or maybe you were the one who finally stood up when nobody else did. Let's talk about it. If this story moved you, even just a little, drop a 1 in the comments, or tell me where you're watching from. And hey, if it didn't sit right with you, I still want to hear why. Your voice matters here. And if you'd like more real, honest stories like this, stories that reflect the grit, grace, and quiet strength of everyday people, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join us for the next one. Because out here, we don't just tell stories. We remember who we are and why that still matters.